everybody. Not much in the way of announcements. One thing you should watch for next month is the State Historical Society's conference, which is going to be digital, and it's going to be spread out through the month. So there are going to be 2 or 3 sessions a week. You'll get, if you're on an email distribution list, you'll find out what's up for the week. Steve Berlin graciously included a link for registration in the conference, and if you do that, you'll get email notifications of what's going on. It's not a one-day deal. It's a 3 or 4 week deal, which I think will be fun. I'm just happy that they're gonna have it. Let's see, do we have visitors? Let's introduce visitors. That's always a nice tradition. Anybody have a visitor with them want to speak up? Please, Brent.
Brent, I'm still a visitor. I haven't joined yet, but I'm very happy to be here.
It's great to have you here. Thank you.
Thanks.
And my sister-in-law, Jan's sister,
I'm a visitor.
Pat Stewart, is in near Moscow, Idaho.
Pretty country. Thank you. Welcome.
Hi.
Anybody else?
Well, thank you.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. I always talk over people. It's a bad habit.
No, that's okay. I was just going to say, though, that I am a graduate of the University of Utah, as is my husband, and we love your school. And I'm a retired junior high librarian.
Cool.
Glad to be a visitor here.
Thank you. Great to have you here. Any other visitors? Okay, nobody's confessing they have visitors or being a visitor. So I want to thank Steve Berlin again. I mean, the newsletter, if you aren't reading the newsletter and following the links and reading Will's and Al Schindler's columns and reading Kurt Bench's reviews of books, you're missing out, because it's really extraordinarily good. Kurt this month is continuing his series of reviews on prominent Utah artists or Western artists. Last month it was Frederick Remington, who isn't really a Western, although he did it in the genre. This month it's Maynard Dixon. There's some exhibits of his stuff. I love Maynard Dixon, and I may need to fork out the $100 to buy the book. It's really quite beautiful. There are vintage columns by Will Bagley and Hal Schindler. There's an extraordinary number of fascinating links to historical issues and articles that Steve has provided, and you ought to follow them. One of those is you can register for the State Historical Society's conference, and I know it's going to be good, because I'm going to do a paper on looking at all 30 photographs of George Buchanan in prison stripes, because he wasn't in prison stripes long enough. I also want to thank you all for your support as Utah Westerners. We have tried very hard to continue our meetings, to have meaningful presentations, to have fun activity with the movie last month. None of that could work unless all of you were contributing to it, and I know the board is extremely gratified, grateful to see all your efforts. Walter Jones, our speaker tonight. Walter, you're good. I don't want to lose you. You're right there. Is wonderful. He wanted to give himself plenty of room to speak about Spanish Borderlands tonight, and so our introduction of Walter is his introduction of himself in the newsletter, which was really fun and wonderful. And you need to read it if you haven't. It's a little more self-deprecating than it should be, but other than that, it's perfect. So for those, if anybody hasn't paid their dues yet, please pay up. Our costs continue, and we just need to get them. We don't want to have to try to collect it, and we don't want to kick anybody out. So let's get your dues in if you haven't already. And with that, with the wonderful introduction in the newsletter, Walter Jones is going to talk to us about Spanish Borderlands. Walter, please.
Okay, Ken, a problem. I've hit Steve and Craig, I have hit the share screen, and I get a screen that says host disable participating screen sharing.
Craig, can you enable him to share screen?
Can somebody do that?
I just did that. I forgot to do that. Yeah.
No problem.
I thought that was supposed to be the default, but it's not.
Okay.
Now it works.
Now I don't see it. All right, just a second. Okay, you should see it now. However, you don't. One more time.
We just did this, so we know it works. I mean, you and Steve and I just did this, Walter, so we know it works.
Yes,
So
that's not working. Okay, let me look at instructions. Alt, tab. There. Can you see it?
not yet.
Not yet.
Okay.
So select share screen and then select PowerPoint.
Okay. Try it one more time here. Get rid of this.
Are you seeing the PowerPoint, Walter?
I am seeing what I should be seeing, but you're not seeing it.
Right.
So from the Zoom window, move your pointer around and right at the bottom, the green share screen
Oh,
button.
it says share.
Aha.
Hey,
Oh, nope, we're back to the Zoom. So you need to go out of that one.
Okay. All I have to do
Able
is
to Alt tab over to PowerPoint.
okay, one more time.
We got David drinking his beer.
English cider.
Could it be,
Coming up
could it
from
be
this-
that too many people are active? Maybe they have to turn everybody else off for him to do that.
No. Okay, one more time.
So share screen, then select PowerPoint.
Okay. Well, see, I've done that, Steve. Now,
I'm sorry, Walter, but you don't represent the geographic Southwest.
well, I'm getting there, Greg.
All right, keep moving.
Are you seeing PowerPoint yet, Walter?
I'm seeing PowerPoint. See, I'm right on PowerPoint, but it's not sharing. So
Walter, do you already have PowerPoint open before you're doing the share screen?
yes, I do.
Okay, down in the bottom of the share screen box, you should see some little showing you what you have open. PowerPoint should be down there so you can click on it.
Okay. I've got that.
Walter, at this point, hit Alt tab till you see PowerPoint.
There you go, right there.
Can you see it?
Hey,
You can see it.
yep.
Am I
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
That didn't work according to the way it should have. Here we go.
But it
Here
worked.
is the full screen. Here's my presentation, the Spanish Borderlands. Now, this is a PowerPoint presentation. Here's what the Borderlands were in 1776. I have a little cursor that's walking around. Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay. Florida, Then you see a big gap. That's the French. The French drove a wedge between Florida and the rest of the borderlands, which were Texas to California. But that gives you an idea in 1776 what the borderlands consisted of. Now, the first thing you have to know about the borderlands is settlement was not immediate. It came after exploration. Now, the people who explored were basically conquistadors or businessmen who wanted to find gold or possibly a water route to the Pacific. Here is an important statement. The Crown did not supply money, troops, colonists, or equipment. The only thing that the Crown supplied was its permission. Spain was a monarchy, top-down rule. This is going to be very important as people like Anglo-Americans came into the borderlands, scared the Spanish to death because of a democracy and also because of a Protestantism. But the Spanish government controlled New Spain as much as it could, given the communication gaps. But within the Crown was an organization which is much like the State Department, except much more powerful, called the Council of the Indies. They made a lot of decisions. Now, to emphasize religion, Spanish took with them priests on these explorations. The priests served two purposes: the religious purpose, but they also became many times the scribes for the expeditions. They were the note takers. Now, the expeditions were hazardous. You see, there are several reasons for that. The one I want to talk about just for a second here, you see reason number 2, unfriendly Indians. That's not fair. That statement really of mine is not fair to the Indians, because the Spanish quite often did not operate on behalf of the hearts and minds of people they were exploring. So they irritated them. So the return was unfriendliness. But basically, the expeditions were hazardous. This map, because it's so small, you can't see what all these lines, what expeditions they represent, but the value of this map is to show the extent of explorations. And this is not all of the explorations. Look how much of the nation of the United States was covered, all the way up to Tennessee, to Kansas, all the way up California coast. And this map is a little bit inaccurate because explorations went up to the Chesapeake Bay. And I'll get into that in a few minutes. But here are your explorers. I'm only going to talk about two. Is a really condensed version of a 6-week course I teach. Here's De Soto. There's his expedition. He was the one that got off of his boats at Tampa Bay, went through the vastness of Florida, clear up into Tennessee. Then he came back down into Alabama, turned north again, and went up into Mississippi and Arkansas. Now, where he came in, where he turned up into Mississippi, down here, he came to a village called Maliba. Maliba was ruled by a chief called Tuscaloosa. De Soto demanded supplies from Tuscaloosa. Tuscaloosa refused. So what basically that De Soto did was he used his Zippo lighters of that period of time, and he burned the village down. That's not a Spanish way of winning the hearts and minds. You're going to find the Catholic priests do a much better job than the explorers. But now here is the result of De Soto's problems. He died near the Mississippi River of a fever. The Indians around him at that time were so unfriendly to him that his people had to bury him in the Mississippi River. They put him in a blanket, filled that blanket with sand, rolled it together, and slipped him into the Mississippi at night. They didn't want the Indians digging up his grave and desecrating it. Now here's one I want to talk about. This is the second one. This comes closer to home. This is Dominguez and Escalante. Basically, they had a fantastic Santa Fe, which was at the time, in 1776, the time of our revolution, it was the capital of Spanish New Mexico. Their mission, Dominguez and Escalante, was to find a route to Monterey, California, brand new community, 1769, which was, Monterey was the capital of California. So they wanted to find a route between Santa Fe and California. They had to go north a ways because the Comanche and other tribes directly to the west of Santa Fe were not friendly. So basically they went north, but they went too far north. There had been an explorer in Utah before Dominguez and Escalante, Rivera, who was about 8 years before. He went into Utah, about where you see the town of Dove Creek. And then he explored the Colorado River, came back, 2 expeditions. That's the route Dominguez and Escalante wanted to follow, but they got lost. So they went way up the Rocky Mountains, came into Utah, up in the northern part around Jensen, Utah, and then south. Basically, by the time they got down to approximately Cedar City, they were running out of supplies. Their Timpanogos guides deserted them. They were having internal dissensions, so they turned back and went home. 5 months and 1,200 miles. Great expedition. Now, I want to talk about settlements. These came later, sometimes as much as 160 years after exploration, but here come the settlements. First of all, they were slow, and they came after exploration. The institutions that brought settlement into the borderlands was first the Catholic Church. Now I have to make this point very clear. The Spanish were devout Catholic, very fervent Catholic. So they wanted to proselyte among the Indians. This is a good thing to some extent, but basically that's the church. Secondly, to protect the church and to the missions and to protect the civilian settlements, the Spanish had to build forts, or as they called them in the 1700s, Presidios. They had to establish those. Thirdly, they had civilian settlements, which were villas or pueblos. Those are the 3 elements of Spanish settlement or permanent occupation of the borderlands. Now, the first missions, this is a picture, beautiful picture. And you're going to find, I talk about this place a little bit more later. This is the Carmel mission. Here's what it looks like on the outside. Beautiful mission. These are 2 Catholic priests in California. They were dedicated to proselyting and to bringing Indians into the Catholic Church. Those who came in were called neophytes. But are the pictures on your right of screen blocking some of the view? Or can you read the whole phrase there? I can't read all of it. But here come the missionaries. They're an arm of the church, and they came in to basically friendship the Indians and offer them a less traumatic transition into European culture. Very important. You do not find, and I'm not criticizing us, but you do not find the English doing anything of this nature. As the English came in to Massachusetts and Virginia, the Indians were in the way, pushed them, called manifest destiny. The Spanish were much more gentle. Now here's the Carmel mission again. Here's the purposes of the mission. Convert the Indians, big one, number 1. 2, they helped pacify an area for settlement. 3, they acculturated the Indians. 4th, they served as a religious center for the Spanish of the region. They served as a vocational facility for the Indians, teaching them European methods of farming, of carpentry, of all sorts of tools. So they were a vocational school. They were a hub for trade. And they were a stimulus for agriculture and cattle raising. Now this shows the floor plan of the mission at San Luis Obispo, California. If you can see my little arrow, there's the chapel, or in some cases it's called the basilica. There's a courtyard. What you see that looks like railroad tracks, those are grape arbors. California produced a lot of wine. By the time the Spanish basically settled California, the missions had to be self-sufficient. And one thing they did was they grew grapes and made wine. So here you have the chapel, you have the plaza, you have housing for priests and for the neophytes, you have classrooms and religious, economic instruction areas, you have the workshops, you have storage rooms. It doesn't show them here, but they must be in there someplace. Then you have the gardens and the farmlands, and you have the grazing areas. Those are the facilities of a mission. The mission just wasn't a few priests preaching the gospel. It was a religious community. Now, this is something that fascinates me as I go through the Spanish borderlands, the significance of mission bells. Now, the shape of this narrative here looks like a bell. That was just by accident. But the bells were important. They basically were the foundation of the orderliness of the mission. The priests were very orderly. They had a time for everything. This bothered some of the Indians who were more free-spirited. And you're going to find in some ways, particularly the Pueblo, are going to rebel against it. But the mission bell is very significant to the Catholic Church in the borderlands, as well as other places. There was a strong connection between the mission and the Presidio. Now, I'll let you read this for a second if you can see this.
Alter, I'll just mention that in that ribbon of faces over on the right, at the very top of it, there are some little tiny icons, and if you select them, you can get it to fold down to just nothing.
I can.
Yeah, right?
Now, where are you talking about the icons?
At the very top of the pictures of people,
Yes.
move your pointer up there and you'll see appear some icons.
Okay, now which one do I choose then? Oh, wait.
The smallest one on the
Second
left.
from the left.
Okay, now you can see the whole thing?
Yeah.
Oh, hey, I'm learning. This Zoom stuff is new to me. But anyway, here is the idea of a connection between the mission and the Presidio. Here's a picture of the Presidio of Monterrey. It's cheating a little bit because this was in the 1830s. Spain did not own the borderlands anymore. But this is Monterrey, California. There are some Spanish soldiers, and here's what the Presidio of Monterrey looked like in a drawing form. There are some features here that were fairly consistent among the Presidios, but basically I'll get into that in a minute. Now here's a statement on the Presidio. This is a Presidio in I think this is San Diego. I better look and see. They look somewhat similar. No, that's the Santa Barbara mission. I'm in Presidio. So the Presidios were oases. The travelers would come to them. Soldiers build their houses around them. I'll get into soldiers in a minute. Merchants would come here to sell goods. Farmers planted the crops nearby. So this was basically a center of gravity. Now the Presidios, this by the way is the Presidio of, and they all look the same after a while. This is the Presidio at Santa Barbara. That's their chapel. Here's what was inside the Presidios. The chapel, a square or rectangular area for the soldiers to assemble, the adobe, wood, or stone buildings. That's an important statement. This was a time period in which the facilities of missions and forts had to be built from local materials. There were no railroads, nothing to import building materials from. Like, remember one time Marty Bradley talked about Utah structures. Once the railroad came here, the architects had many, many more possibilities of building materials. Not so back then. So if, like in Florida, you had lots of wood, you'd have wooden structures. California, stone. Somewhere in the New Mexico area, adobe. Now the walls had firing positions and corner blockhouses. You saw the blockhouses in the Presidio of Monterey. They had the barracks, they had storage facilities, and here is a Presidio in, this is San Alba, which is north of San Antonio. That is a very elaborate Presidio, and this is the remains of one, stone. Stone lasts longer than wood. The duties of the Presidios: they protected the missions, they conducted supply trains, they escorted missionaries, merchants, colonists, they explored the regions, and they carried the mail. Now the soldiers. These soldiers were not the conquistadors. They weren't the adventurers. They were local people. They came from the area where they served. They were raised on the frontier. They were tough people, hardy, lots of stamina. They were hard bitten. This is going to be a problem in some ways. They were used to harsh and isolated terrains. They were accustomed to brutal and unconventional Indian warfare. They basically had families that lived either with them or close to the Presidios. These factors meant you weren't going to have a lot of desertion because these were local people. They lacked training and discipline. They were at ease on horseback, a very, very important factor in Indian warfare. They were occasionally aggressive in treatment of Indian women. That was a real problem. I'll get into that in California in a few minutes. The Pueblos, or the settlements, they were established along what was called the King's Highway, and I'll talk about that in a minute. They were civilians who had their residences, their yards, their corrals, everything that they worked with were there in their Pueblo. They were centers of commerce, merchants and Indians. Businesses such as fisheries, slaughterhouses, and tanneries were located there. Craftsmen offered their services. They were located near the missions and the Presidios. And they were often the seat of local government offices, particularly Santa Fe, Monterey, St. Augustine, San Antonio. But here is the Presidio. I mean, this is the settlement of Monterey, California, with the Presidio very prominent there, Monterey Bay. Now, I just threw this in for a reason that I wanted to talk about a little bit about urban planning. This Richard Henry Dana was an American citizen in Boston. He ultimately became an abolitionist. But as he was going to, and a lawyer, as he was going to school, he suffered some health problems. His doctor said, get out and have some exercise. Get away from school for a while. So he booked passage on a merchant ship, leaving Boston, going clear around the Horn of South America and up the west coast of the Americas. He was good at learning languages. So whenever the ship docked for the captain to trade his goods for furs, Dana would go with him, and he would speak with the Spanish people wherever they spoke. And he wrote a book called 2 Years Before the Mass, came out in 1840, excellent book. But in it, he said, he's talking about Monterey. He said there are in places and other towns which I saw in California, no streets or fences, except here and there, so that the houses are placed at random upon the green. What he's saying is they were just thrown here and there, hodgepodge. That's not always the case with Spanish communities, particularly places like New Mexico, which did not have a lot of presidial protection. The towns would use around the outside, the perimeter of the towns, buildings that enclosed the town for protection. So they had some organization. Monterey didn't have that. Now here are the roads, the King's Highways, El Camino Real. They all started in Mexico City. One went up through Texas into Louisiana, which basically was populated by the French, and there are some conflicts here, but there's the highway that went into Texas. You can see it was sort of a web of highways. One route broke off and went up to above Santa Fe. It followed the Rio Grande River, New Mexico. The third one went up into Arizona from Tucson into California, and it was California's highway. Now here's a little amusing fact about California's El Camino Real. It followed the coast, but there was an interior route, not far interior, but an inland route called El Camino Viejo, which was a clandestine route where smugglers did not want to be seen by officials along the official route. So they built their own route. Now, I love this picture. This is a picture of the Californians in the early 1900s marking the route of the El Camino Real, the official one, like we've marked the Lincoln Highway today. But they were marking it with what looked like a shepherd's staff and a bell on top. Basically, those markers were seen throughout California along the highway, but they began to disappear in the 1930s. But they were beautiful markers. You see old photographs of missions, you may see one of these bells right next to it. Now here are the areas settled. Florida, and you have to take these settlement dates with a little bit of skepticism because there's some irregularities here. New Mexico, look at these. Both of these are long years before the settlement of Jamestown. Texas, now there's a little bit later. Arizona, California, way later. Florida. The background you see here is the symbol for the Spanish flag in New Spain. That's the Burgundy Cross. There's the man who basically colonized Florida, Pedro Menez de Arias. He was a successful settler. He was also a devout Catholic, but a pretty brutal man. Here is a fort. This is one of the forts he established. You see in the right-hand side, about halfway down, there's the Spanish flag. The French are attacking the Spanish fort. This is in the upper part of Florida. There's a great deal of conflict, international conflict over Florida. The Spanish win for a few years, but by the time the United States develops, it loses. But anyway, there's a conflict. The Presidio system in Spanish Florida. There were several Presidios there. Basically, they were early ones. But the western part, Apalachicola, was in western Florida. There was nothing left west of there until basically, I'm going without my notes. Oh, I forgot it. But anyway, there was one in the west. But the point being, most of them were wood. Here is one that was replaced 10 times to the point that finally it was built with masonry, so it withstood. This is a drawing of today. It's a historic site. This is in St. Augustine. Here is the icon of Spanish, not only Presidios, but missions. The icon is archaeological sites. You see a little stonework here, but most of what you see in Florida was wood, so it wasn't lasting. And basically, foreign intruders destroyed a lot of them. Here is the missions of northern Florida. Now, what they show at the mission trail was not much of a trail. You see the Appalachia area? That was good farmland. There's a river coming down from Georgia, and the farmers would send their crops through the by sea down to the Suwannee River, up the Suwannee to the Santa Fe River. As far as the Santa Fe River went, then they would unload, and on the Indians' backs carry the supplies to St. Augustine, which is misspelled there, but that's the Mission Trail. Here are the buildings, crude. Basically, they're made of just mud and plaster, wattle and dab, oyster shell cabbage, simple, sometimes even with dirt floors. But here is the mission. Now here is one, if you can see it, this is an awfully small picture, but here's that mission I just showed you a minute ago in the Appalachia region, and here's the Presidio nearby. And here's what the mission looks like. This is a replica today. You see the mission with a thatched roof. There's the ubiquitous bell on 2 posts and the lintel, and then the Catholic cross. So there's the mission. Now here is something fascinating I learned from this research. The Spanish explored Chesapeake Bay area. They call it Bahia de Santa Maria or Bahia de Madre de Dios. What you see in the background is an artist's conception of the mission they established there. And here's the name of it. It was spelled differently in different documents, but it was in Virginia on the peninsula. What you see in the background is the Indians of the area killing Spanish priests. In 1570, Spanish priests founded the mission in Chesapeake Bay area, and they did that with the intent of bringing Christianity to the Indians there. In 1570, they captured an Indian named Paquiquino and took him to Mexico City. They dubbed him Don Luis. They gave him Catholic instruction, brought him back to Virginia, and he escaped. So the missionaries went to find him, and he killed them. Then he led more Indians to the Spanish mission, and they killed all of them except one. Now here comes De Avilas. He led an expeditionary force a year after the killings, and he basically exacted revenge. He could not find Don Luis, but he baptized several Indians, and I don't know why he did that before he killed them. Maybe it was to allow them into the kingdom that he believed in, but he also attacked and killed others. The Spanish weren't all good to the Indians. De Avilas was a very brutal man, brutal against the French who were not Catholic, brutal against the Indians who would not convert. Now, New Mexico. Here is Juan de Oñate. And right now I'm going to have to mention, in today's Black Lives Matter movement, this man is tar and feathered. There's a statue of him in Albuquerque, and protesters want it removed. This guy was brutal. Basically, he got so mean to people that the Spanish government in Mexico City recalled him and would not let him go back to New Mexico. These are the missions. And I know you probably can't read all of those missions. This is just a small map, but I want to talk about the one called Abo for a minute. Now, the settlements in New Mexico were to an extent very good to the Indians. They wanted to basically proselyte them and give them a very soft entry into the Catholic Church. One way they did that was music. Abo was on a salt plain, so the citizens there mined salt, sent it to other communities, and from the money they earned, they imported an organ, a very, very fascinating feat. There's the Abo mission. fascinating, but it's just ruins. Now here, this is the mission in Santa Fe. I want to talk about the bells just for a minute again. See, this expands the idea of the bells. The bells brought Indians to catechisms and worship, and fabricated in Mexico or Spain, and basically even the explorations took bells with them for the Franciscan chaplain to celebrate the masses. This book, by the way, I'm quoting from, is Marc Treib dissertation, beautiful book. And he had it published as Sanctuary of Spanish New Mexico. It's a very scholarly book. Now the Presidios of New Mexico, basically, and I'm going pretty fast now because I'm taking a lot of time. Basically, there were no Presidios in New Mexico. So I'll leave it at that. In 1680, there was a huge revolt called the Pueblo Revolt. And basically, the Pueblo Revolt was against Spanish exploiting the Indians and the land, which irritated the Indians. In addition to that, the priests began suppressing Pueblo Indian religious beliefs that the Pueblo medicine men attempted to integrate with the Spanish. The Spanish did not want that. Then began a period of military arrest, incarceration, and torture. And the Pueblo medicine men who were incarcerated were quite frankly tortured cruelly. Another reason for the revolt was the Pueblo desire to return to ancient ways. This was somewhat like the ghost religion. It was a movement that had roots in several different areas, but the Pueblo Revolt was one of them. The Indians believed that the Spanish could be driven from New Mexico's Rio Grande Valley, and hence the the Indians would have nirvana again. And besides all of this, the Indians were unhappy with droughts and with the Apache raids. Now here is the man who fostered, created, and led the rebellion, at least at first, POPAY. The statue of him here is in our national capital. Every state has two statues. We have Brigham Young, and now we're going to have Martha Hughes Cannon. But POPAY was imprisoned because he was a medicine man. He was tortured. He developed a seething resentment of the Spanish. And after he got out, the Spanish continued to persecute him. He planned a revolt for 5 years, and this man was organized. See in his hands a rope. That rope has knots on it. He was so well organized, he got together 6,000 warriors, and he sent to the leaders of each little cell a rope with knots. And the instructions were every morning the leader would unknot one knot, and at the end of the knots, that would signal the day of the revolt. Now, basically, what happened? One of his deliverers got caught, and so the Spanish knew about it. So POPAY had to move his revolt up, but it worked. Now, one thing he promised. Here's nirvana again. With the Spanish gone, the Indians would be rewarded with good health and prosperity. These things did not happen. POPAY died during the revolt, but it took the Spanish 12 years to come back into New Mexico. During the revolt, 400 Spanish were killed and about 2,000 had to flee. 21 out of 33 priests were killed. It was really basically a defeat for the Spanish. Texas. I love this picture. It shows 2 years. This is the very first mission in Texas. So it represents the Borderlands period. But if you look at the title underneath, this was built in the 1930s during the Great Depression by a New Deal works program called the Civilian Conservation Corps. So that building is beautiful. Now here's the man that led the soldiers and the missionaries to that building. The French were in Texas, so Alonzo de Leon chased them out, built the mission, first mass conducted, but the Indians of the area blamed the Spanish for a smallpox epidemic and rose up against them. As the missionaries left, they buried the church bell and abandoned the mission. Now, this is a mission that ultimately moved to San Antonio. See again, the priest moved several times, final home in San Antonio. The reason I'm mentioning this one, this mission was noted for its acequia, which was the irrigation system, which I'll talk about in a minute. I know I'm running out of time, so I'm going to go pretty fast. These are the Presidios. See, there were 8 of them. This is a Presidio in the west. It was on the Rio Grande River. Now, it served as a collection point for Zebulon Pike, who was arrested in northern New Mexico. The Spanish did not want Anglo-Americans for 2 reasons: democracy and Protestantism. This is the acequia system. That's one that exists today. I mean, it's still there today. Now, here is a man who raised cattle in Texas. I'm going to go through this fast because I'm running out of time. Quite an organized system. Arizona, fascinating. 3 areas of missionary work: northeastern along the Little Colorado River, the southwest along the Gila River, and the southeast along the San Pedro and Santa Cruz rivers. Here's the man that established the mission in southeastern Arizona. Now, one important factor of this is he was assigned by the Council of the Indies to go to the Sonora Desert, and he moved up into New Mexico, Arizona. Here's one of the missions he established. Beautiful mission. It was rebuilt, so there it is today. Now, here are the 4 Presidios in southeastern Arizona. The Presidios in the north and the Presidios in the west were basically snuffed out by Indian revolts, but down in the southern part, there was some soldier influence, so they were more secure. California. Here's the soldier who led the first expedition into California, first settlement expedition, and he took with him Father Sarah. Now, one thing, Sarah today, everything I've read about him sounds good, but in today's Black Lives Matter, there's a whole lot of dislike of him because of the Spanish exploitation of the Indians. So he's basically, people are wanting to remove his statue. In fact, several years ago, somebody removed his head from this statue, and when it was found, it was put back on. Now there's the El Camino Real with 21 missions strung along the coast. Now this is the one in San Diego. See, the idea that Indians were taught blacksmithing, handle making, and so forth, that's the vocational aspect of missionary work. But here again, the Indians were required to work. And this somewhat violated the Indians' sense of freedom. And they didn't like this all the time. Here is Father Sarah. He established 9 missions. I should say he established 8. See, this last one, he was old enough that he wasn't there to help found it, but he was there at the dedication of it 2 years before he died. Now, here's the mission in San Diego. I love this picture. Here is an Indian revolt in San Diego. This is a priest who's being killed by the Indians there. Not always did the Indians appreciate the Spanish proselyte. But in this case, Father Serra interceded on behalf of the Indians, which gave them a sense of security and friendship. And so he helped put down that quick rebellion. Here's Carmel again. You notice this is the mission as it looked in around 1900. If you go there today, first of all, it looked like back then, it's out in the middle of nowhere. It's in the middle of Carmel today, and it has all of the facilities it once had reconstructed. It was first established in Monterey, and here's where the soldiers irritated Indians, women enough that Serra moved from the Monterey, the Presidio and the mission were close together. So Father Serra took it over to Carmel in order to free the Indian women from the Spanish soldiers' lecherous moves. Then this became Serra's headquarters, and he's buried in the basilica there. Fascinating place. This is a mission at San Juan Capistrano. And I put this up, it was destroyed by an earthquake. Hence, earthquakes, California. Even Portola, as he was moving north in 1869, encountered an earthquake in what is now Los Angeles. This is a beautiful mission. Notice the symmetrical design of the frontage, the two bell towers. First one established beyond Serra's era. I like that description. Here's the missionary who founded it. And here is the fountain. Very peaceful place. Now the Presidios. This is the Presidio in San Diego. First was San Diego, then was Monterey, then was San Francisco, and finally Santa Barbara, which was a bridge between San Diego and Monterey. This is what the San Francisco Presidio looked like. Now this was a pirate who came up from South America. He absolutely sacked Monterey, which showed the vulnerability of the Spanish in the borderlands. Then he went down. He was going to attack the fort or Presidio Santa Barbara, but basically it was too strong for him, so he just burned some outlying ranches and took off. Now, cattle raising was a big issue, a big economic concern in California. Look at the places that are named now after the rancheros: Pasadena, Huntington Beach, San Clemente, Oakland. They were big places. By the time the United States took over California in the 1840s, there were 10 million acres of land. Now, the breakup of the Spanish Borderlands. First came Florida. Andrew Jackson, at the request of President Monroe, went into Florida to pursue some criminals, but he got a little bit too active there, destroyed some areas, and the Spanish realized by this time that they could not hold on to Florida. They had been raided in the early 1700s. They're raided by Jackson, so they gave the Florida to us for $5 million, which went to repay the people whose land, whose properties were destroyed by Jackson. 1836, basically, Texas rebelled against the Empire of Mexico. 1819, 1820, the people of Mexico, New Spain threw off Spanish control and created the Empire of Mexico. And Anglo-Americans began to flood by the mid-1820s into Texas, and they took over Texas in 1836, but we left it alone for a while. It would look too much like a blatant land grab in the 1830s. 1845, the French began to negotiate with the Republic of Texas some diplomatic relationships, which basically violated the Monroe Doctrine. So James Monroe, President of the United States in 1845, Manifest Destiny President, fought Congress into annexing Texas. As a springboard to provoking the Mexican government, James Polk had the army stationed on the Rio Grande River, and he provoked enough that the Mexican government responded. So Polk went to Congress and said, war exists. Congress gave him millions of dollars. So we declared war on Mexico. And Ulysses Grant, who was a lieutenant at that time, said, we were a big bully pushing around a little country. But Grant did his job. He was in the military. We won the war and took over the Mexican cession, which included Utah. We're here today, California. Then in 1853, we purchased from Mexico the gas and purchase. Now that basically covers the Spanish Borderlands. Thank you for listening. And I got just about in time. So I know that was fast. I don't know what you want to do next, but I'm here if anybody wants to ask questions.
Let's have some questions. Did anyone have questions, Walter, on this wonderful presentation?
Well, I want to see if I can get pictures of people again. How do I do that, Steve?
Yeah, stop sharing.
Okay. Now, how do I get rid of?
Walter, I will first want to say how beautiful your PowerPoint was. That's excellent PowerPoint, and the graphics were just tremendous.
Well, Steve, thank you. What it was, though, you may have sensed it was a little bit hard to follow because that's a very deep condensation of what I give in 6 weeks. But thank you. Now, I need to get people's pictures again.
I have a comment.
Yes.
First, thanks, Walter. That was fascinating. I grew up in New Mexico, and in the 8th grade, we studied New Mexico history, and Juan de Oñate was considered a hero.
Yes, he was there.
So that was kind of interesting. Also, I wanted to mention 2 books that are of interest, both by a guy named David Roberts.
Okay.
Might have heard of him. One is called Escalani's Dream on the Trail of Spanish Exploration of the Southwest. And in that, he follows Escalani's trail. He starts in Santa Fe, drives all around, ends up back in there in Santa Fe. Another that he wrote that I've read, I think about 3 times, and actually I'm thinking I'll read again, is called The Pueblo Revolt.
Yes.
And it's all about the Pueblo Revolt. And that's, it's an absolutely fascinating book about how they planned all this and the results of it, and how the priests were, and Acoma were thrown over the cliff. They were defenestrated. They were thrown over the cliff. And one final thing on that, there was a Pueblo up in Arizona called Awadavi. That was one of the Hopi mesas. And even after the Spanish were thrown out, or after they came back in 1692, they were not allowed to come back to the Hopi mesas. So in 1700, Awadavi allowed Spanish priests and the other Hopis from the Mushagavi and others, Oraibi, were so outraged by this, they attacked the Awadavi, killed the men, enslaved the women, and killed all the priests. So they held strongly to their beliefs.
Well, thank you, Roy. Nice comment.
Walter, let's
Walter, that was fascinating. What about, when did the Russian incursion start on the California coast?
Guys, hold on for just a second. Walter.
Yes.
Alt tab until you get back to the Zoom window, and then stop sharing.
Okay, I thought I had done that already.
Do Alt tab again.
Okay, now I don't see a stop sharing.
Well, hold down Alt and then keep clicking tab until you get back to where we started from, with the view with other people.
Okay, but I don't see. Have I done it? Well, I've screwed it up.
Keep going. Keep doing Alt Tab, Walter.
Okay. Nothing's happening.
Yeah, hold down Alt and hit Tab until right at the bottom it shows you you're all the way back to Zoom.
In your browsing history, Walter.
Yeah,
Oh, not
definitely.
really.
Ooh.
Uh-oh.
Over. I see Roy as a full screen, but I do not see anymore where I can. Should I go into share again?
Yeah, click share, and that turns it off. It toggles on, off.
Okay. Am I doing any good?
It said you started sharing.
It looks like your golf game is good, Walter.
Yeah.
What?
Your golf game.
Walter,
Yes.
can you hear me? This is John Taylor.
Yes. Hello.
How are you? That was a wonderful presentation. Walter, are you familiar with books written by J. Frank Dobie, Hidden Lost Treasures of the Southwest, and Apache Gold and Yankee Silver, Coronado's Children?
I have not read it.
Yeah.
You should.
Okay.
It would make a wonderful addition to your learning about what's happening in this part of the world.
All right. Well, thank you, John. Hey, now, John, I appreciate that. As I'm playing around, I'm getting very close to something that says leave session.
Ooh,
Yeah, I don't want to do that.
don't do that.
Yeah,
Hurt Dobie's
we don't
books.
want to lose you, Walter.
Well, I don't want to get lost. Now, I'm just going to leave it at this for a while.
I had a question,
Okay.
Lisa Michelle. So I loved the idea that you talked about the different approaches of the missionaries versus the conquerors
Yes.
and how one was more successful than the other. Is there reading we could do on actual missionary stories, like the lives of particular missionaries? Did most of them come to the US and then live the rest of their lives here and die here, or were they back and forth? I'm just really interested in the missionary commitment to this Borderlands issue.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad. That's a good question, Michelle, Lisa. Find a book on Junipero Serra.
Okay.
He is an example of the missionary full blown.
Okay.
And I think that's a starting point. Oh,
Hey,
There you go. Hey.
You did it.
Woohoo. There.
but try him, Michelle.
Okay.
Yeah, I forced him so he can't share anymore.
Good job. Thank you, Craig.
Yeah, thanks, Craig. Also, Lisa, there's a book. There are books on Father Kino, Kino.
Okay.
Those are two long-term missionaries. Look
Great.
for them.
Thank you very much. I will.
There's a lot written on that.
Walter, I want to say I really enjoyed your PowerPoint also. I thought you did a great job putting it together. I'd like to mention one other book that I think everybody ought to consider looking at, and it's called The Other Slavery, that addresses some of these issues too and gets into it a little more, because a lot of the Indians were practically enslaved prior to the revolt and whatnot. So I think people might find that one enlightening.
You know, that's a good comment. You know who else was enslaved? Well, Cara would find ghost shoots and take them down the Spanish trail to trade with the Spanish for horses and other goods. So he was taking slaves, which was a real problem when the first white settlers came to Utah. They objected to that slavery trade.
Walter? Could I add to that, Walter, that that's probably true. But if I understand correctly, the Mormons owned slaves as well.
You know that,
a couple, many, but some.
Not many, but some. Now, one thing that happened in Utah, remember, the Mormons were trying to get out of the United States. When they moved here in 1847, Utah was still part of the Spanish Empire. But within a year, it was United States. 1850, with the Compromise of 1850, Utah and New Mexico were forced to accept slavery as a condition to sell that compromise to the South, which was losing ground because California was coming in free. It's a bad situation. There's a man named Matt Harris who teaches at the University of Colorado at Pueblo, who has written a book about Mormons and the African Americans. I haven't read it yet, but he did extensive research at the University of Utah. Imagine he's going to have comments about what you were talking about for us. Thank you.
Also, I want to add,
mention the book.
you didn't mention Bartholomew de las Casas.
No.
And my understanding is that Father Sarah was brutal, whereas my understanding of de las Casas is that he was more humane towards the Indian people.
He really spoke out against Spanish treatment of the Indians in the entire New Spain. He was not happy with the way the Spanish.
So he was more throughout the entire area then, rather than a particular state like California.
Of course, he was prominent in Central America and the southern regions of Mexico, and his influence in Spain with the royal leadership was quite extensive. So his writings, which were published, are and have continued to be a cornerstone for looking at the other view of the Spanish towards American Indians and people of color from the Caribbean area.
Walter,
Right.
Walter,
I wanted to mention, Walter, I wanted to mention something for Lisa in her search for an understanding of what was going on with the missionaries. There's a classic called When Jesus Came, the Corn Mothers Went Away. That's the title of the book. You'll want it. When Jesus Came, the Corn Mothers Went Away.
I want his shirt.
Yeah.
Hey, Walter, quick comment, since we were talking about mistreatment and good treatment of the Native Americans by the Spanish missionaries. As I understand it, the edicts that came down on colonizing in the missions indicated that if a Native American converted, but then denied or left, they were allowed to be captured and become enslaved. However, if they stayed in their beliefs, they stayed in the mission. If they ran away, they were brought back. So some of the slavery results because the Queen said, treat them good. There were very strict orders. They were not always followed. But once the neophyte disavowed or ran away, my understanding was they could be enslaved or at a minimum brought back and kept forcibly at the mission.
You know, maybe I made too much of the good treatment, but there was good treatment. If you looked at the Pilgrims' treatment of Metacom and others, the English were not nearly as enlightened as the Spanish. The ones that were really good were the French, who mingled and married with Indians in the north. And then the fur traders of the 1800s, they married women, of different tribes. But the English basically wanted the land and pushed out everybody. Andrew Jackson asked Congress to give him the Indian Removal Act, and he just removed every tribe in the southeast, including those along the Ohio River, because the white planters wanted that land. So
I think it's important to point out too that a lot of this stemmed from the doctrine of discovery, which was a papal doctrine adopted by the Pope, and then various royalties thereafter. And these doctrines were established right around probably about 10 years before Columbus, within a 10-year period. And those doctrines basically said that the indigenous people are savages because they are not Christian, and therefore they have no right to the land or land claims. And that pretty much governed their treatment of Indian people. It was a dehumanization of Indian people as a result of not being Christian. And that was kind of the guiding policy.
Lest we forget, Queen Isabella was the mother of the Spanish Inquisition. I mean, these were people that weren't always that kind to anybody.
So I have a title for you. Walter, very well done. Thank you for both the PowerPoint presentation, and I enjoyed your overview. That is a very challenging topic he has taken on to try to present to us in about a 50-minute period. My compliments to you for doing that. David Igler was a historian here at the University of Utah in his youth. He left us to go to UC Irvine, where he has had quite a career. His second book that he published is called The Great Ocean: Pacific Worlds from Captain Cook to the Gold Rush. And what he describes in that book is how trade worked up and down the Pacific coast from essentially from Alaska down into Sonoran, Mexico. And the period of time, of course, is the 1790s to 1850. When you look at this book, and I highly recommend it as an extension of what Walter is talking about, and an understanding of how both the Spanish and Mexican empires are influenced into the Pacific Rim area and beyond all the way to China, you will be astounded at the amount of activity there is for that 60-year period. And what happens during that time period is the movement of non-Indians up the rivers, the great rivers, all along that Pacific coast, and how it alters those missions that Walter is talking about, and the tribes that existed on the great river banks, and changed the nature of the entire Indian community well into the interior from the West Coast. It is an absolutely fascinating look. It's very well documented, and it will alter your view of the period that Walter is talking about, the late Spanish period, the Mexican period, and the way in which the West developed. So nice job, Walter, and thank you so much for the hard work. I know you spent a lot of time putting that together. That is not easy to do for what he did for us tonight.
Good job, Walter.
Walter.
Excellent.
Thank everybody for being here tonight. Westerners is challenged now to have our programs, but people like you come and make it worthwhile for all the work we do to have these. Thank you.
Yeah, claps to everybody. Let me just mention, next month, we're having Dr. Devon Hale. He's a retired emeritus professor of medicine at the U of U Medical School. He's an infectious diseases expert. He's a historian. He's going to talk about the Spanish influenza epidemic in 1918-19, particularly with a focus on Utah. And to complement that, he's going to talk about, guess what? The coronavirus pandemic, and it could not be more timely. And Steve, you heard him, didn't you, with Joe Hatch?
Good.
And I think he's good, and I think it'll be a great presentation. So circle, I think it's August 18th. No, that would be today. I think it's September 15th. So watch for the emails, and we will reconvene then on September 15th. Thanks so much for everyone for participating. Thank you, Walter, for a great presentation. Thanks everyone for comments and questions. This is exactly what we should be doing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Walter.
Show. When's dessert?
Yeah. Well, it's whatever in the refrigerator or the stove there, Ed.
Anna has a nice big watermelon. I think I'll dive into that.
Good for you.
You're here.
Thanks,
Walter.
Great to see you all.
Forrest Kutch, where are you?
Forrest?
Change your screen, Greg.
Yeah.
This is Tom.
I went away. I need to talk to you. Can we have